Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on a pair of African nightcrawler worm bins. There are these two black bins, one above the other, bins number 1 and 2, that were last fed 12 days ago, but I got a feeling that the stuff that we gave them last time is not going to show up as leftovers. We gave them stuff like the leaves of radishes, some chunks of strawberry, a little bit of coffee and worm chow. I mean, perhaps some of the bedding we gave them, some leaves might still show up as leftovers, but I've got a feeling that they're probably ready. And the stuff we're going to give them today is another really fast food, watermelon rinds, and I think they're going to enjoy that. Well, let's get them up on the bench, see how they're coming along, and give them their watermelon treat. Not only is it a tasty treat, but it's a juicy one too. And there's also a couple days worth of coffee here. Before we get started, let me just share a couple stats about the systems. They've now reached 207 days of age. I believe I already mentioned how it's been 12 days since the last check-in, so we kind of missed their 200th day in service. Happy 200 days in service. Congratulations. And over their lifetimes, they've been fed 18 times, teed up for feeding number 19 in the form of delicious coffee and watermelon rinds. Not too surprising to see a big crevice forming down the center of the bins where we last fed. These leaves we gave them last time, well, you know, every other system that I have that's older than these is already in the phase that I refer to as foraging, which means feedings don't include any bedding anymore. I don't think we're ready to do that yet with these little guys, but one thing I'll typically do towards the point in time when the systems are getting up there in age, I'll definitely withhold the use of leaves as the option for bedding, because the leaves bring with them those little stems, and those little stems seem to take a lot longer than the rest of the leaves, and it's for that reason I prefer to kind of cut them off at some point, and to have still given them leaves last time just prior to reaching 200 days of age. Not sure if that was the most wise idea. It's very likely that some of these leaf stems will take some time before they'll break down. Well, whatever. We'll remain optimistic and see how things go. Let's upturn the feeding zones to see if any of the leftovers that we thought we might see are in here. I mean, I did mention strawberries, and with the strawberries usually come the leaves of the strawberry. And even though the delicious berry itself most likely gets gobbled up 1, 2, 3 within a matter of a couple days, the leaves occasionally remain. So if we see any leftovers of the actual food, I would think that that's the sort of stuff we might see. So here we've got some sort of a large fragment of paper. I'm questioning if I should even be tearing it into smaller bits, not knowing if it's a piece of paper that's not willing to break down. I'm not sure if this was stuff added last time. I'm not always 100% sure of the stuff I'm putting in my systems, you know. I mean, I get stuff from here, from there, I try new things. And even though this might have looked like totally usable paper, it doesn't look like it's received a whole lot of wear from having been right down there in the feeding zone. So perhaps it is wise to keep it in large chunks just in case we realize later that it's something that might not have ever even belonged in the worm bin and never should have been put in the first place. So I'm not going to try to shred it into little bitsy pieces. We'll just keep them in fairly large chunks like this, and we'll give them another try for sure. We'll put it right back down into the feeding zone and see what happens. Just wondering what kind of paper that was. It kind of has like that paper bag-ish kind of quality to it, or almost like packing paper. And whatever's in bin number 1, when you have pairs of bins in my wormery, it's very likely you're going to find almost the exact same setup in bin number 2. So we're seeing a little bit more of that. I'm not going to become awfully pessimistic about this stuff. I'm just going to remain cautious. and perhaps not even so much cautious, just try to remain aware of the stuff I'm seeing and try to treat the stuff I'm seeing as being clues to whether things are going well or perhaps could be doing better. So I guess we'll just have to see about that stuff. I might have to go back through the video from last time, or maybe even 2 videos ago. It looks like the sort of stuff that probably got included with the last feeding. I mean, I did just sort of skim through the video from last time just to see what types of foods were put in, but I don't really recall what was discussed so much during the last check-in. So I might have to scrub through that video again really quick just to see what the deal with this stuff was, to see if I could recognize what kind of paper this was and try to get a reality check on what to expect from it. Well, either way, we're going to keep it intact and right in the place where we would expect for it to get the most amount of worm action once the worms come after this delicious feast. And man, there's a lot of food here. This has got a good bit of weight to it. So even though it's got a lot of weight, though, it doesn't seem to me like a whole lot of food. Somehow when I see this sort of stuff and I feel a lot of weight to it, I just imagine that it's mostly water that I'm feeling as far as the heaviness of it. And you know, all the other systems that I have that are older than these are all already at some sort of a later stage of their life cycle in terms of foraging, which just means no new bedding. And in a way, it feels like that's kind of where we're headed now, since we've got replacement feeding zone indicators. The old feeding zone indicators can go right down into the feeding zone as supplementary bedding. All these leaves that were resting out on the top surface, I think we could simply blend those in. If that paper that we found in the feeding zone from presumably from last time is still viable bedding type stuff, then perhaps it'll start to kick into high gear now. Better late than never, but try to remain optimistic. So I'm starting to wonder if perhaps it might be time to consider switching these systems to foraging too and withhold the application of bedding. I'm still just hemming and hawing on the topic. I'm not willing to commit. I can always reach behind me and grab my little container of prepared bedding and at least sprinkle a little bit in just so we don't feel like we've prematurely entered foraging, especially since the last system that I entered into foraging only did so a few days ago. Maybe it is a little bit early for that here. So, you know, just for the sake of it not being the start of foraging yet today, I'm going to grab my supply of prepared bedding here, and even though I don't have much, I'm going to grab a little bit of it and include it with today's feeding. Why not? It's not a lot, but at least we're not sending them down the road of foraging quite yet. We'll treat that as their application of bedding to accompany today's feeding. I'm going to put these feeding zone indicators aside just momentarily because I'd really like to blend all these leaves that we encountered along the way into the system nicely. Somehow, I think we did something quite similar last time. I think we encountered leaves sprinkled out on the surface last time too, and we blended them in everywhere. And that to me seems like a really good way to get the stems of the leaves into a place where they're going to have a much greater likelihood of being worked on rather than just resting out on the surface. I mean, being out on the surface is not a problem. Everything will eventually go. But it does seem to me like if the stuff that you want to see worked on is submerged and surrounded by damp materials, it's got a somewhat better chance of being worked on by the worms. And that's kind of the way I was thinking in terms of trying to get these leaves geared up for a swift breakdown rather than just sitting out here. And I also kind of like the way the leaves look when they're all blended in everywhere. And I got a feeling the worms appreciate it too. It just gives all the material throughout the bin this nice kind of consistency of not just being a bunch of bedding only, I mean a bunch of castings only anymore. It's still getting fresh bedding or relatively fresh bedding blended into it all over the place. At the same time, we're using this as an opportunity to not only aerate the outer edges while we're blending leaves in, but we're also taking a little peek to see how things in the outer edges look. Everything in these systems looks pretty normal. Everything looks pretty smooth sailing. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing worthy of concern. So I'm definitely liking what I'm seeing, and I'm just kind of wondering if it might be time to get these systems breathing a little bit more in terms of access to ventilation and evaporation and drying. All the other systems that I have that are older have already had their plastic covers removed, and whether we would want to do that here as well, I'm just trying to once again stall so I can make a decision that I am comfortable with. And you know what, I think for now we're going to stick to having the plastic on just a little while longer. I think that's probably a good idea. But things in my wormery have been taking quite some time to kick off their moisture content. Things have been very damp, and at some point I might want to be switching them over to some sort of a newspaper type top covering or something, but for now I think we're good for a fairly status quo check-in. Give them more food, give them more bedding, don't make any significant changes or anything like that. But they are at that age where it might be time to start transitioning them to things. We've already decided no more new leaves, so at least we've started to treat them, you know, the way we should at their age, by not giving them any more leaves, any more leaf stems specifically, and start, you know, thinking in terms of a nice smooth transition to harvest. So that's it for the check-in, everyone, with the African night crawlers. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.